Hello, everyone. This is Ray Sammy from Jennifer Schaus & Associates. Welcome to the 2018 edition of Webinar Wednesdays, brought to you live from Washington, D.C. and hosted by Jennifer Schaus & Associates. Our topics cover all things related to U.S. federal government contracts. Thanks for joining us today. Our panelists are industry experts and include consultants, attorneys, accountants, and other professionals who work in the federal contracting sector. Our webinars are complimentary and are held every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. They are all recorded and can be viewed on our YouTube channel or directly on our website under the webinar tab. In the interest of time, we will not be taking questions, so please send your questions directly to the speaker. Our information is available on the last slide. All right, a little bit about us. We're a Washington, D.C.-based consulting firm serving both product and service companies worldwide. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and contract administration. We can help you with GSA schedules, proposal rating, ADA certification, and more. We host events throughout the year, including training classes, so please visit our website or sign up for a complimentary newsletter to stay current. Today, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Mary Beth Bosco of Holland & Knight. Mary Beth will be discussing highlights of the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, or also known as the NDAA. Thanks for joining us today, Mary Beth. Let's dig into highlights of the 2018 NDAA.
Sure, thank you. As most of you probably know, the NDAA is an annual act. It was signed into law at the very end of 2017. It authorizes military programs, contains things like spending limits, how many planes the Air Force can buy, etc. But it also impacts procurement. The Chapter 800 of the statute very often has procurement provisions in it, and also sets up pilot programs when the government is thinking of implementing some changes. For example, the 2018 NDAA has some pilot programs to demonstrate blockchain technology to determine if this is something the DoD will feel is secure enough to take up in a big way. It also establishes a cybersecurity expert, sort of a sub-agency within the Department of Defense, which I think is interesting because the personnel will be both DoD and civilian experts in cybersecurity. I haven't seen much about the implementation of that, but that should be something to look out for. I'm going to cover today 4 changes to classic procurement issues. The first is bid protest procedures. The second will be audit procedures. The third is what's been termed the Amazon program. And the fourth is some additional restrictions on the use of low price, technically acceptable contract provisions or solicitation provisions. Can we go to the next slide? So in terms of bid protest changes, there have been kicking around for several years ideas on how to reduce the number of what the government would view as frivolous protests. One of those ideas is to charge a filing fee at GAO, and GAO is in the process of developing a new electronic database for bid protests. And once that goes live sometime this year, there will be a $350 filing charge. In furtherance of this effort, the NDAA requires the Department of Defense to launch a 3-year pilot program. It's to begin in late 2019, and that's to give DoD time to propose regulations as to how this will work and hopefully give the public and the contracting community a chance to comment on it. The basic premise of this pilot program is that if you file a protest against a DoD procurement at GAO and you lose, you will have to pay DoD's costs incurred in processing protests. The requirement is only going to extend to larger businesses that have at least $250 million in revenue during the year previous to the protest. At the end of the program, DoD has to report to Congress about how the program worked and whether it was successful. Interestingly enough, again, the proof will be in the pudding. The NDAA itself does not define what DoD's costs are. For example, are they going to include some kind of a proxy for attorneys' fees for DoD attorneys? Also, what is success? So we should all keep a lookout for those proposed regulations on the program to see whether how it's going to be implemented. The other bid protest related matter in the 2018 NDAA is expansion of the existing Air Force pilot program to all of DoD awards where they are over $100 million and for small businesses greater than $10 million. If you've had an Air Force protest in recent years, what the Air Force has been doing is giving the protester or giving potential protesters very fulsome debriefings. You will get a copy of the source selection memorandum, the source selection briefing slides, which will have competitor information blacked out, but which will have the full evaluation of your company. The purpose or the thought behind doing this is that by providing disappointed offerors with a lot more detail about how the agency viewed their proposal, it might dissuade people from filing protests. In other words, you will be getting what's similar to what might be in the agency record if you did file a protest before filing a protest. So, it may cause you to think you have a stronger case, but on the other side, this information may cause you to think that your case is not as strong as you thought and maybe forego filing that protest. One thing I'd like to add in this regard, very often contractors file protests when ask for debriefings when they lose, particularly given the amount of information you can get out of the Air Force now and soon all of DoD. You might want to ask for a debriefing, even if you win, because then you'll get more detail about what the agencies think is good with your proposal, and maybe there is some room for improvement. So we often tell our clients, even if they've won, they might want to think about a debriefing. Next slide. Let's do the next slide as well. Now I'm going to switch to talking about the the changes to incurred cost submissions. And let's go to the next slide. So if you're a government contractor who has a cost reimbursable or flexibly priced contract, you currently go through a process whereby you submit what's called an incurred cost submission to your contracting agencies and DCAA, which projects your indirect rates for the coming years, and those projected rates are what you use to price your flexibly priced contracts. DCAA then comes in after the year is closed and you have your actual cost experience. You will submit a final incurred cost submission using your actual costs. And if they deviate from your proposed submission, there will be a true-up. You may owe the government money, the government may owe you money, depending on how your actual rates compared to your provisional rates. DCAA for a long time has been very far behind in doing these audits. Some companies are looking at years before 2010 that still have not been audited. And those flexibly priced contracts remain open because they haven't had the final adjustment. So the NDAA has been used as a vehicle to try and alleviate this problem. In past years, the NDAA contained a prohibition on DCAA being able to provide audit assistance to other agencies, to the civilian agencies. This year, what the NDAA has done is authorized DoD to implement a program whereby it will hire independent accounting firms from the private sector to conduct audits of contractor incurred cost submissions. The goal here is to eliminate the backlog by 2020. Next slide, please. Again, this is something that will be implemented in the future, and DoD will be publishing proposed regulations for how this will work. The agency is required to submit a plan for the selection of qualified auditors not later than October 1st of this year, and it has to award the contracts by April 1st of 2019. So DoD will be setting parameters both for what the standards for the audits themselves, and also standards for the selection of the auditors. My initial reaction when I saw this was to think, wow, what a great gig this might be for auditing companies. But I think companies interested in this also have to weigh the conflicts of interest that may come by being the auditor for DoD. Next slide, please. The third highlight of the NDAA for this year is what we've been calling the Amazon Marketplace concept. This has also been kicking around. There have been standalone bills introduced in Congress. And the thought is that the government ought to be able to buy products off of a platform like Amazon so that it can buy things much more easily. And in fact, early drafts of the bill directed that Amazon would be the platform that the government would use. In the NDAA, the GSA, who's supposed to establish this program, is required to compete the program. To compete for the platform provider. One of the other things is that the initial drafts of the legislation stated that the companies who would be selling to the government through the Amazon or similar platform would not have to comply with the typical government contract clauses and regulations. As you can imagine, that set off a real controversy because companies who had spent the money to set up compliant systems would then be competing with companies who didn't have to do that and could sell off of Amazon and then presumably beat them on cost. So the NDAA says that for this program, the e-commerce providers will have to comply with the procurement laws that that their competitors who are already government contractors have to comply with. Next slide, please. The final topic is LPTA procurement. the government was extremely enthusiastic about LPTA procurement for several years ago, but it has caused untold problems in that awarding to the low price, technically acceptable offerer did not always get the government what it really wanted. So the NDAA has restricted DoD's use of LPTA. It can only be used now when the goods are expendable in nature, non-technical, have a short life expectancy, so really for short-term procurements, and also not in procurements where there's any type of innovation to be gained. It is also prohibited in engineering and manufacturing contracts for major defense acquisition systems. And the definition of major defense acquisition programs are either through a dollar threshold, or the Secretary of Defense can designate what is a major defense acquisition program, and therefore ensure that LPTA can't be used. Again, like some of these other programs, GAO has to file a report with Congress annually on LPTA procurements valued in excess of $5 million, meaning Congress wants to keep an eye out on whether the procurements were successful ultimately, whether the procuring agency who used LPTA got what it needed and didn't have trouble with its contractor, or whether the reverse is true. And with that, I think my time is just about up, so I will turn it back to you.
Thanks so much. Great presentation, Mary Beth. And thank you again for sharing your time and knowledge on this topic. And thanks especially to our attendees. If you guys have any questions, please contact Mary Beth directly with the information you see on your screen now. Next week, we are covering subcontracts, 10 important keys. And the full schedule of webinars can be found on our website under the webinar tab. Thank you, and this concludes our webinar.